Coming up, the offseason for the New York Football Giants takes its first blow as a linebacker goes down. Do the Giants have the depth to replace significant reps on this roster, or will they need to look outside? We break down that, plus a visit from an old friend, Kadarius Toney, and the social media circus that is the Kansas City Chief wide receiver. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants right here, right now. And also the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast, my boy Doug Norrie. And yonder there's the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the well-seasoned and summered Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I'm good, Adam. It feels like we haven't done an episode in a while. Is that true or is that false?
I know. Bad news, Andy. I've been doing a lot of episodes. I just have not been calling you to jump in. No, listen, I feel like this has happened to us a couple of times over this course of this offseason, and maybe it was just a reality check for where we are in our lives, professionally and personally, that the offseason deserves a bit of a podcast lull. And that's effectively what most of this summer after the draft has been for you and me. And now I think we'll slowly start to build this back up. But there's some talking points here. By the way, for all of the lack maybe of episodes that we've been doing, not a lot has changed up until we got this Davis injury for the Giants in camp.
Yeah, I mean, once free agency kind of came and went and Giants got the Daniel Jones deal done, they franchise tag Saquon Barkley, there's no compelling events that need to happen between a couple guys come in for their first practices, get shown around the facility, but we're slowly starting to get into crunch time where injuries pop up that we may talk about, as well as deadlines for some key Giants, in the next week or so.
You better believe it, man. So the first one on the list, we said we'll talk a little bit of Kadarius Toney, and Andy's going to give you some background on that young gentleman, and I'm going to give you a perspective that no Giants fan's going to appreciate. But what is just your initial take on Jarrod Davis? What he accomplished for the Giants last year? Kind of represents this, off the scrap heap guy that ends up coming in and having a real role for the New York Giants. Where's your concern level taking him out of this rotation before we talk about those depth pieces that could replace him?
Well, it's interesting because Davis was kind of that diamond in the rough that they found that fit Wink Martindale's system. Yep. He's a little bit older, Adam. He was drafted in 2017 in the first round by the Detroit Lions. He's getting older. He's 28 and a half, soon to be 29 years old. So it's not like a young up and coming guy that we're hoping is, just scratching the surface of his talent. But he filled an admirable role. And Pat Leonard of the Daily News was the first one to report the news that Davis suffered a significant knee injury. They don't have a timetable, but it sounds like he may be out for the season, if not for, well into week one and beyond. And so, what I found surprising, I thought this was a pretty big blow because right next to Okereke kind of sat where Davis was going to be, knowing that he could build on the contributions he had last year. What I thought was interesting is Art Stapleton, beat writer for the Giants, basically came out and said, he kind of said it wasn't that big of a deal. He actually had Davis on the bubble of even making the 53-man roster, which I found surprising given they added Bobby Okereke, but not much else. It's a lot of the same guys that are there. And Davis was starting. How can he go from starting to not even having a spot on the roster?
And let's go. Remember, Okereke, right?
Okereke.
We got to do the. I look up Bobby. I let him pronounce it, and then I try to repeat it. No keys. Okereke.
Like carrot cake. Okereke. See? Guess what? Everyone that's listening is going to do that now and say a carrot cake.
Would you like some carrot cake? I think I would. So that the Art Stapleton part was what I found interesting, because when it first gets reported, whether from Pat Leonard and then just starts to get, digested by everybody, some people are saying, well, so now you have to look at the roster and look at Darian Beavers and look at Micah McFadden and see if they can step up to fill in that role. Then you have Art Stapleton saying, I don't even know if I had this guy making the roster. The hard part for me, just looking on in that linebacker group there, it's hard for me to look at Okereke, Beavers. Then you get into what? Micah McFadden. We like some things that we saw from him certainly last year. Looked at him, I think, at least early on as being more of a contributor than a lineup and start full time for you kind of player. And then you're talking about Carter Coughlin and, Troy Brown. Like Cam Brown, I guess, is like somewhere in this mix of inside, outside. Does he have a role? He's a special teamer, obviously, for the Giants. That's where I get a little bit concerned, unless what we're saying is, if not for the injury last season, the Giants had this plan for Darian Beavers, and now he's healthy. He's ready to assume that mantle. You know how high I was on him. We both got very high on him very quickly, gets derailed last season. If you're telling me that that was the intention, and that by midway of last season or working your way through, that Beavers was going to be really inserting himself into larger rep roles, then I can look at this injury and say, okay, that's fine. But outside of that, it's not like the Giants did so much here beyond adding another starter alongside this position to say, oh, we have so much depth here. Anyone could play that role.
Yeah, I agree with you. What I find interesting with Davis is it felt like he was a key contributor. He only had 11 total tackles for the Giants in the games that he played. Obviously, he played well enough to be able to solidify some of the inside position. Had a 68 Pro Football Focus, take that with a grain of salt, but was an average player, replacement type player. But I think you and I both agree that Beavers seemed like he was, on the fast track to being a starting linebacker for the Giants. Yeah. We're also hearing a lot of people talk up Micah McFadden, saying he has this athleticism, he could be a guy that contributes. So there are two viable replacements that are also younger and cheaper that are on the roster now. But keep in mind, Adam, there's one name that keeps popping back up, and that would be Deion Jones, the linebacker formerly of the Atlanta Falcons. Deion Jones came in for a visit at the beginning of April, didn't come to an agreement with the Giants, but they liked him enough to bring him in. It seems like that would be a logical first place to go if you're going to go outside the organization and look for a veteran to be able to fill this gap.
Yeah, and I think reminder too, right? Mentioned about Davis, 3 games on the regular season ledger, the last of which was against the Philadelphia Eagles, where he has the 6 solo tackles and the 5 assists and the half sack, right? So you go in, it's like the stats aren't going to tell you much. He obviously has a role inside of the playoff games as well against Minnesota and then against Philadelphia in the loss. So maybe it is. It's like, recency bias around the last time we saw this player. He was lining up and doing things for us. Now maybe it looks a little bit different. And if anything, if you watch or are a fan of the show, you know that I'm a proponent of the young guys. I always want to be younger. I always want to go younger. I always probably want to get away from a veteran player at 29, 30 years old, probably 2 years before you really need to, in favor of some young talent. So it will be interesting to see how that fleshes out. And then to your point, they can still go outside the organization here. I think there's at least some time to continue to evaluate who you have in-house and then make those type of decisions and add a warm body if you need to down the road. The other thing, too, I will say before we move off of this, I will also mention that, remember, a year ago, you would look at, I think because of injuries again as well, but you would look at the outside linebackers, you would look at the edge rushers and that group as one that is trying to continue to grow, continue to add depth. Now you get Kayvon Thibodeau into his second year. You hopefully get back a fully healthy Azeez Ojulari. You look at a guy like Ward coming back, obviously, Fox coming back. Maybe even a player like Ellerson Smith is going to factor in there finally if he ever can stay healthy, right? So I think you also look around the linebacker group and think that we are a stronger team overall, a stronger defense overall, which makes you a little bit less concerned. A year ago, any injury, you go, well, that could be it. And that's actually the big question I had for you was, can the Giants sustain injuries like this? If a fringe guy, contributing guy, as long as it's not Adoree Jackson, as long as it's not Kayvon Thibodeau, the Giants can afford to sustain an injury here or there and still be okay because they have at least decent, if not young depth.
And as you mentioned, Adam, don't forget guys like Carter Coughlin, Tomlin Fox, Cam Brown. There's still a whole host of players that could fill this role. I to your point about can they sustain injuries? No, the Giants can't sustain injuries. But, with a caveat to say, who is it, right? Is it, Leonard Williams? Is it All-Pro Dexter Lawrence? Like, who is the person that we're talking about? You mentioned Adoree Jackson. He feels like he's one of those key contributors. There are some guys around the fringe that are playing at a replacement level that, guess what, can be replaced by other players on the roster.
Okay. We'll see how it plays out, obviously, with Davis and with the linebacking group. You take, Andy. This is your platform here. You take as much time as you want to lay out the scenario, the history, the journey that has been to this point, Kadarius Toney. And then whenever you want, you ask me whenever you're ready, you ask for my opinion on what's gone on, because obviously Kadarius Toney has taken to the social media circuit and has been engaging with Giants fans and vice versa, as have fans been with him.
That is correct. And this is really my area of expertise, Adam. When we get into like the social media back and forth, all things like not related to football, I go very deep down the rabbit hole. But this Kadarius Toney thing has taken a life of its own. I thought it was going to be just something on Twitter that went around with a handful of Giant fans. It got picked up by major news outlets and major reporters saying, like, look at what's happening. And for anyone that is not familiar, Kadarius Toney was traded away from the Giants because he was drafted by a previous regime. And there are articles talking about the Giants better be right, about all the red flags that there are about a guy like Kadarius Toney. And it was Joe Judge and Dave Gettleman saying, we've done the vetting. You don't know how much vetting we've done. We have the guy we want. They seem to overlook that, he had an airsoft gun in a gang rivalry type situation back in Florida. He was pulled over with AR-15 assault rifles while on campus. He was suspended under Urban Meyer. It takes a lot to get suspended by Urban Meyer at Florida. All these red flags. Then he comes to the NFL, has injury issues, right? Only plays 12 games for the Giants. When he was out there, he looked electric. There's all these whispers about what's going on inside the building. There was early trade rumors before the season even started that, he wasn't one of the guys that they saw long-term. He gets traded off to Kansas City, actually wins the Super Bowl this year, makes 2 amazing plays in the Super Bowl, catches a touchdown pass, 65-yard punt return. Adam, he was awesome in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs. And I think for the most part, Giant fans were like, thank you for beating the Eagles. We appreciate it. He was one of our guys. But now he's off as a Kansas City Chief. And that's kind of where I thought things were going to just stop. The end of the journey for Kadarius Toney. He can say how much he loves being in Kansas City, all this other stuff. And then it starts with him getting his Super Bowl ring fitted on his middle finger and holding up his middle finger and saying, this one is for all those people in New York. And so he likes to poke the bear. And guess what? When you win a championship, you kind of get a little bit of leeway to talk your trash to whoever, however you want. So then you got to expect that there's going to be a handful of people that will end up sending you messages or mentioning you on social media saying why are you bringing up New York? We didn't do anything to you, so on and so forth. And then Kadarius Toney doubles down and creates videos of him in the dark with just his teeth showing.
Good look, though. It's pretty cool.
The video was fantastic. I was kind of intrigued by the video. But then he starts talking about how Brian Daboll's playbook was terrible and he doesn't like Joe Shane. There was no creativity, and he's so glad that he's out of there. And he just starts talking a bunch of trash about the organization. So then Giant fans come back to Kadarius Toney and say, what are you doing? Leave us alone. Move on. And a bunch of unpleasantries are sent Kadarius Toney's way.
Sure.
Kadarius Toney then decides to respond to all of the DMs that he gets on Twitter and everywhere else and starts threatening people, shaming people about their appearance and their weight, telling people to send their address so that he can meet them outside in the streets. And
but he was hacked.
It baffles.
He got hacked.
It baffles me that it even gets to that point. He's leaving voice messages in DMs to Giant fans at 3 a.m. saying, I don't miss Daniel Jones. He misses me. Why is he blowing up my phone? Just bizarre. The fact that he's responding at 3 a.m. to random Giant fans in his DMs. And then the coup de grace, Adam, is that he just writes, sorry about that. I was hacked. And we know that he wasn't hacked. Because he had the voice messages. He had the video of him in the dark. It would take a lot for someone to
he meant his brain
and then
was
go
hacked.
into his
It was a brain hack.
And so, Adam, I say all this to lay this all out because I want this to be the only time that we have a conversation about Kadarius Toney moving forward. I want to get your thoughts on everything that has led up to this. Do you care at all? Is there anything interesting about what has happened? And what are your thoughts on Kadarius Toney in general?
Okay. No, I don't care at all. First of all, I don't care at all. Now, here's the thing. The part where it gets to where he's responding to people and, body shaming people and threatening people and being outside, like that thing unto itself is a bit of a problem, right? Like that's a problem and you can't be doing that. In the infancy of all of this, though, like this is what every player does this. Like professional player, if you get traded away from somewhere, you go on to win a championship, you're gonna throw shade back at the organization that didn't think you were worth keeping, right? Like whatever the circumstances. So my only thing at Giants fans is like, if you don't care about Kadarius Toney and what he's doing and what he's about and what he's up to, then why do you care? Like, then why are you responding to the bird flipping ring? Who cares? It doesn't affect you. We traded him. We've moved on. We believe in the young receivers that we have. And, it's all good. So that starts the engagement there. Everything after that is all what happens on social media, and it gets caught in a cycle and blah, 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 blah. So in that regard, I just think like my message to Giants fans would be like, stay classy, right? Like, who cares? Congratulations on your ring, man. Continued success in Kansas City, because it doesn't matter to anything the Giants are going to do. And oh, by the way, I'll give this caveat before my overall take on Kadarius Toney. If you found out that Kadarius Toney plays out his rookie deal and is available on the market and said, really like what I'm seeing from Kafka and the New York Giants, and let's say that Robinson doesn't work out, right? Sterling Shepard is gone from this roster. Don't even talk to me about Giants fans that would say, hey, listen, if he understands that that we're a good system here and he can fit in and he's on his best P's and Q's, of course we'd bring him back in. Like, Giants fans would welcome a talented weapon at any position if the price was right and all those little details. Like, I would have the conversation. You talked about not even OBJ, never had a problem off the field the way we're talking about with Kadarius Toney. But the idea of like bringing back OBJ was like, well, you at least have the discussion for all of the various possible reasons. And what did it always come back to? Can he be talented and help the team on the field? If Kadarius Toney was that dude in a couple of years, I guarantee you Giants fans would say, hey, as long as he stays out of trouble and he's productive, what do we care? So there's a very delicate balance here about how you talk about a player versus like how you would feel about them if you were still on your team, right? You'd be like, hope he gets his act together this summer. If he's in training camp, he sure could be dynamic. Like, you'd be talking about it differently. Kadarius Toney overall seems like a massive knucklehead. I don't think that Kansas City will be the last team that he's on, probably, because I think he'll probably roll around a little bit. And to your point, let's just be clear here. Kadarius Toney, after he was traded over to Kansas City, took him a long time to really make a massive impact. He had those first couple of games with 4 catches and 2 catches, 57 yards, had the touchdown in that second game against Jacksonville. After that, it was a fairly quiet, one explosive game against Denver, and then, as you said, had some really impactful plays in the playoff run that helped them win a championship. Like, he helped them win that championship, no doubt about it. He is still very much a player as a receiver that you say, can he be that full guy that you need him to be, especially in a Kansas City offense, right? So there's still question marks about what he's going to be as an NFL wide receiver, but you can't take away that he's a champion. Like, you can't sit here and be like, you don't deserve that. The only thing you don't deserve is to have a former Giant berating people through DMs, voice messages, and otherwise. That part of it, he's responsible for. He looks like an idiot for it, and he doesn't look like a guy that, is fully grasping what it is to have a bit of a PR presentation for yourself as a professional athlete.
Adam, his contract is 4 years, $13 million, right? Like, he's a multimillionaire, Super Bowl winning wide receiver. And if he just put up the finger with the ring and said, this is for all of you in New York, and then did not respond to anything, it would have been perfect, because that's what normal people do, right? Like, that is exactly what I would expect. Like, if you've ever been let go at your job and then you have super success at the next place, you're maybe throw a little dig, throw a little shade at one place or another. But
the bagels were never fresh, something like that.
Well, Adam, and the other thing is like fan is short for fanatic. You're
Of
like,
course.
Giant fans should stay above it. It's like, no, Giant fans have nothing going on. They want to like rile up a famous multimillionaire professional athlete. Like that is the whole point. They don't have, they aren't better than that. We are not better than that. It takes a very, very, very wealthy athlete to be able to just say, you know what? None of those people matter. But instead, Kadarius Toney weirdly kept his DMs open, but then would block anyone from commenting on any of his posts. And then they find Andy Reid or someone from the Kansas City PR team was like, hey, I've got a great idea for how you don't start threatening in your DMs. Like, let's just let's scroll over a little bit more and unclick that button right there. And all of this is taken care of. It is just so bizarre to me. But Adam, I mean, in the very high level of all this, if you think about it, the Giants got a third-round compensatory pick, which ended up yielding Darren Waller for the Giants. And so for me, it's
even a better reason to be above it. Yeah.
Right. Like all things considered on the field, Darren Waller obviously has his journey and his story of where he came from. But like, I'm very happy that we have Darren Waller instead of Kadarius Toney right now. And I am very happy that Kadarius Toney has found success somewhere else. Like it can be both. It's just bizarre behavior.
Oh, of course. And that's the best way. By the way, oftentimes, you try to, what's the right response when someone's trying to take a dig at you, trying to get you to buy into it, right? When Kadarius Toney puts it up, the only response any fan should have had was, thanks for Darren Waller, right? And then you leave it there because that's what we turned you into. We turned you into a guy that we think actually is going to be the catalyst for our entire offensive system. And in weeks, if you want to see, this is what you really do. By the way, we're going to get out of here. We have some other stuff we're going to talk about on the next episode, including Saquon Barkley's contract and an interesting question about Daniel Jones that Andy has rolling around his head. But see, I'm telling you to rise above it. But what I really mean, Giants fans, is stew on it. Stew on it for the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. And when Darren Waller is giving you 5 to 7 catches a game, when he's the chain mover, when he's making the big catches in the end zone, connecting with Daniel Jones, that's when you tag Kadarius Toney and say, hey, thanks so much. If not for you forcing your way out of New York, we never would have come to have one of our most dynamic playmakers that we've had in a decade for the New York Football Giants. You got to stew on it, Andy. I didn't realize, but that's what I meant. Stew on it, everybody. And then attack with venom when the moment's right.
At the end of the day, Adam.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about it at the end of the day if you want.
At the end of the day, and you're going to love this one, Darren Waller's first touchdown catch for the New York Giants will eclipse all touchdowns that Kadarius Toney has had for the New York Giants, which is, hold on, checks notes, 0. Literally 0. And so at the end of the day, we've got Darren Waller as a replacement for Kadarius Toney. Good on you. I hope that he really was hacked. I don't believe that he was hacked, but hopefully this is the end of all of this for Giant fans and for Kadarius Toney.
Yes, indeed, my friend. Let's end that journey and hope that the journey forward for the Giants includes not only a whole bunch of receptions for Darren Waller, but also some success inside this linebacking core, as we said, with Davis going down. Who steps up, or do the Giants go outside? We'll continue to cover that throughout the weeks ahead here as we move towards, we're moving almost through midway of July. So we're getting towards that itchy little time when preseason happens, when position battles come down, and we really get a sense of where this team stands. Follow us on social media, One Giant Podcast. Follow Andy Mack 214 and at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter. You can also get us on YouTube, obviously, and your podcast feeds. Until next time, as Andrew Mackwitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.